Hello, and welcome to a special episode of We Are the Machines. Today, we are talking about scaling AI projects, risks, and opportunities. What does it mean to scale a project? In theory, it refers to the ability of a system to handle a growing amount of work or the potential for it to be enlarged to accommodate growth. For example, a business grows by adding resources. A business scales when it can handle an increase in customers without an equivalent increase in cost. Software companies are good at scaling because the cost of selling 1,000 software licenses is the same as selling one. In terms of AI, we look at scaling as building AI models or processes and then building upon the outputs of those models. There are many risks. Specifically for large language models such as ChatGPT, Copilot, Claudes, etc., many companies are using them to write code, as we discussed in our Square Peg Round Hole episode this week. We discovered that the code is imperfect and requires rewriting at times. Eventually, people will become more confident in LLM authored code and perhaps review it with less rigor. LLM code then becomes embedded into systems, and we will have more LLMs writing code upon it to build an army of agents, for example. At that point in the development process, the underlying code is hard to undo. Once the LLMs become part of the infrastructure, it is buried and built upon, despite lack of intimate knowledge of the inputs and outputs of these embedded systems. The risk is that the code runs unchecked or unverified, leading to users blindly trusting the output without understanding the inputs of the system and underlying models. Here's a scenario. Statistics Canada computes important data from which federal decisions are made about taxation, for example, and drives policies such as how to handle the gray tsunami. They do not currently use AI in their computations, but as workers get lazier and society becomes more confident users of LLMs, it is possible for a government to use a Claude code to do data analysis. It makes sense to do so. It's fast, it can sit in a tenanted environment, and Claude is happy to explain how it does the computation. What more proof does the user need, especially if he isn't an expert in data analysis? This results in a general trust in the analysis, so maybe there isn't a redundant verification process. But these numbers are being compiled by an AI. Inherently, it will have biases in the data, and the data can be manipulated with functions that can replicate portions of data to make the case for a certain policy. If, as a result of these policies, the citizens are negatively impacted, is it defensible to blame the AI? Now that's a scaling problem. Let's talk about good scaling ideas. Policy lookup is a great use of scaling. It would be convenient to use an LLM to find out my annual learning and development budget. This can scale to other policies and procedures in an organization. Data collection and analysis is another good application, with some redundant verification process. The key risk is that of compounding systems. Once we keep the components separate and with some degree of transparency, then we can avoid any unknown compounding problem. What is one scaling idea that you have discarded because of this episode, or one you've decided to move forward on? Leave me a comment when you're listening to this episode, and please join us for a Lunch and Learn Q&A session where we will continue our discussion on the risks of AI. Good luck on your journey, and please practice safe AI.